The melody is one of the most important aspects of a musical composition, be it in a song or in a score for something like a film or a video game. In this video, we're going to break down how to write a memorable melody that you can use in any setting. To start off, we're going to take a basic chord progression. We're going to use a 1-5-6-4. This is the most common progression in pop music, and you also see it in other things, like you would find this possibly in video game or film music. For our example, we're going to use the key of C. So the chords we'll be using are C, G, A minor, and F. Seeing as how we know we're in the key of C, the first thing we should do is experiment with just using a C major scale over this chord progression. The next thing you want to consider are chord tones. Each chord is built up of 3 different notes. So when writing a melody to a chord progression, you can just play the notes within the chords themselves. You'll almost always get a good sound by doing this, seeing as how they're actually notes from that chord. The third is one of the best notes to use, followed by the root. The fifth sometimes isn't the best as far as melodic material goes, but it's not something you should avoid by any means. The third is just going to be the nicest sounding. Now let's talk about how we should put these two things together. You need to have a mixture of steps and leaps in your composition. So the difference between a step and a leap is moving up one note in the scale versus making a jump greater than one note. So if you were just arpeggiating chords, you'd constantly be leaping because you'd be going to different chord tones. Whereas if you were just using scales, your melodies would all be stepwise motion. In order to create a memorable melody, or a melody that's just good in general, you need to have a mixture of these two things. Oftentimes it's good to make a leap and then take a few steps. One other thing you should know is if you take a leap greater than a fifth, you need to take a step back in the opposite direction, otherwise your melody will start to sound a little bit awkward. So keeping those things in mind, the last thing we need to consider is rhythm. You want to mix up the rhythms somewhat, but you also want to be consistent in some way so that you have a rhythmic motif, and that just means a repeated rhythmic figure inside your melody, something that can latch on with someone's memory. Something else to consider is using syncopation in your melody. Syncopation is when a note falls on an offbeat. This is really common in pop music, and it can actually create a more memorable, unique sounding melody. So that's also something that you're going to want to consider. So now let's use all these things we've talked about and write a couple example melodies. Like we went over earlier, it's important to make a consistent sounding melody using motifs, both rhythmic and melodic. Here's how that would work. Notice how there's a mixture of step motion and leaps. And also, the real big thing you need to get out of this example is that big leap. You'll notice how it goes back in the opposite direction by a step. That helps keep that leap from being awkward. For this next example, let's focus on chord tones. One of the things you also want to be aware of when you're writing melodies is you want to have some destination you're trying to get to. Usually, a third is a good destination to get to. So we're going to play a bunch of notes that leads to the third of our final C chord, which is our tonic chord. So we're trying to end the phrase on a specific note so it has more consistency. I'm also going to play that 1-5-6-4 chord progression in a little bit of a different style so you can see how versatile this chord progression can actually be. Some of the things to notice in this particular example. When we wanted to get to that target note, the E note of the C chord at the very end, notice how we played the note a step above the E and a step below the E before we actually went to the E. This is called an upper-lower neighbor tone. This is something you get in like SATB writing you would study in like a theory class in college. But what this is basically is you're kind of surrounding the note you're trying to go to, so it creates this suspense that draws you to that target note. That's a good trick you can use when writing melodies. You should also notice in this example that there was a type of rhythmic motif in it. That's also good to have that sort of consistency like we were talking about earlier in the video. I hope you found this video helpful. I'll have some more videos coming out on music theory and on actually writing melodies in the future, so stay tuned if you want to learn some more. There's lots of great resources online. There's definitely more you can learn about this. There's more technical ways to break it down, but this should be something to get you started, kind of get you off the ground writing some melodies right out of the gate, because really just doing stuff over and over again and experimenting is one of the best ways to learn. If there's any type of videos you'd like me to make in the future, let me know down in the comments. I'm very open right now as I'm just getting this channel started.